Welcome, gamblers. UFC 184 this weekend. Not the greatest of cards we've ever seen after Weidman and Vitor got cancelled. But we got Ronda and Zingano. It's a decent headlining fight. The undercard, not so hot, but that doesn't mean we can't make a few quid betting on it. So I'm going to start off in the heavyweight division. Ruan Potts is fighting Derek Lewis. Ruan Potts, he took 56 unanswered body blows in his last fight. And the fight got stopped while he was getting punched to the ribs. Vicious loss it was. But Ruan Potts got showed up as not having a lot of skills. If you look at his record, he fought in Africa only before he came to the UFC. So he's plucked from the Extreme African Fighting Championships and thrown into the UFC against Sol Peleli. And he got knocked out in the first round. And then Anthony Hamilton did all that damage to him. So Ruan, I think you'll be going back to South Africa after this one, because Derek Lewis is a pretty serious dude. Now, Matt Mitrione knocked him out in the last fight, but Matt Mitrione's pretty decent. He's a pretty good punch on him. Derek Lewis is pretty decent too, though, and I just think he's going to have far too much skill for the likes of Ruan Potts. Ruan Potts is slow on his feet. He's won a lot of his fights by submission. I just don't see him being able to take Derek Lewis down. I see Derek blasting Potts, and this being a knockout in the first round for Lewis. He's beaten the likes of Jared Rosholt, Carlos Filho in the UFC, Jack May in the UFC. Derek Lewis is decent. First round KO. One way or another, he's winning. If Ruan Potts can get out of the first round, I'd be very impressed, but I don't think so. So, we got a fella called Rowan Carneiro. Jucao calls himself. And this guy is 36 years old, and probably most of you won't remember him from his previous stint in the UFC back in around the 80s, 70s and 80s. I mean, 79 and 85 he was in. Yeah, looking at his record here, he came in, he beat Rich Clemente, got choked by John Fitch, beat Tony D'Souza, a couple of losses, Kevin Burns, Rio Chonan, then he got cut, and then he's, he looks like he took a couple of years off, maybe a few injuries, but he's on a five-fight winning streak, has got him back into the UFC at the age of 36. This guy's been fighting since the year 2000, so he's got experience and he's got some skills. Yeah, I don't really see it. He hasn't beaten too many really top-level guys. Interestingly, his second fight was a loss against Anderson Silva. He did manage to last five minutes with him, though, back in 2000. Must have been one of Silva's first fights as well. Anyway, he's fighting the Filipino crying machine, Mark Munoz, who, before his fight with Weidman, I think it was, he came out in the press and started talking about how he was depressed and crying and stuff. Not exactly a good thing to let your opponent know a few days before the fight. And true enough, Weidman just I think he went into the fight with one arm tied behind his back, and he still beat Mark Munoz. And Munoz, he's been pretty poor in his last few fights. Lyoto Machida knocked him out with a head kick. Musashi just obliterated him. And he's a win over the Barbarian Boach. Must have been a bad day for the Barbarian, but he has to win all the same. So Munoz has to win this fight. I mean, he's probably going to get put on a fight on this Manila card coming up, but he has to win this fight. I mean, his career is just taking a nosedive. But as much as I have contempt for Munoz, I think he's going to put his career back on track for the moment with a ground and pound win over Carneiro. Carneiro's tough. He's probably got good ground defense, but against middle of the road competition, Munoz does pretty well because his wrestling is top notch. You know that. His ground and pound is top notch. So I would lock in a win for Munoz. I think he's going to finish him with ground and pound. Not sure what round, but I think he's going to do it. I don't think this fight's going to go the distance. So I'll be betting on Munoz for a KO. Alright. Gleison Tebow is back again. Seems like we only saw Gleison a couple of weeks ago. We did. We saw him this time last month against Norman Park. And one of the few picks I made wrong, I picked Norman Park to edge that. But Norman Park looked weak against Tebow. He just, like, his shots didn't have the power that Tebow was throwing with. And the interesting thing about Tebow is in recent weeks, he's been called out as being on diuretics, and well known for being on diuretics in the MMA circles. The guy who called him out, a guy called Ehlers, Jim Ehlers or something like that. And it wouldn't surprise me. We all know Tebow cuts a huge amount of weight. He's a big dude with big muscles. But he's managed to do it so far and not get caught if he is doing it. So we got to give him the benefit of the doubt until he gets caught. But anyway, he's fighting Tony Ferguson. El Cuckoo. That's what Tony Ferguson calls himself, isn't it? Yeah, El Cuckoo. It's not the cuckoo, as I thought it was. I always thought I expected him to cuckoo after he won a couple of fights, but apparently El Cuckoo means the boogeyman. So the boogeyman is fighting Tebow, and the boogeyman's a step up from Norman Park. He's got better boxing. He's got more lethal submissions. And I'd say that Tebow neck's going to be pretty hard to get hold of with all those muscles around it. So I think he's going to be one of the few guys that's going to finish Tebow. And, I mean, I hope that this isn't another case of Tebow just being too big and strong and people not being able to hurt him enough. But I think Tony has the skills to win this fight. And I think he's going to knock out Gleison Tebow. And should get some decent enough odds for a Tony Ferguson knockout. Pretty sure. He's on a good streak as Tony. He's won 4 fights in a row. The skill level of those opponents, Mike Rio, Kakuno, Castillo, Trujillo, not the highest level ever. He lost to Michael Johnson before that, but I fancy him for this. Tebow's on a 3-fight winning streak himself, and interestingly enough, it was Michael Johnson who beat him too. And Tebow seems to, he takes off the second round, he wins the third round, or he takes off the third round after winning the first 2. Against Tony Ferguson, you're not going to be able to take any rounds off Mr. Tebow. And I think, Tony Ferguson knockout, as I said, rock and roll. Okay. Where am I going now? I'm going to Richard Walsh versus Alan Jouban. Richard Walsh must think himself a pretty lucky dude. He's got 2 fights in UFC. Both went to the judges. His last one was a split decision loss. And now he finds himself on the main card of a numbered UFC event. Interesting. I would question the matchmaking and the position of the card of this fight. It's very strange. But Jouban is pretty decent. That's the guy he's fighting. Former male model. One of the hottest men in Los Angeles, according to a website. But he wasn't too hot in his last fight. Warley Alves. It was a serious barn burner of a fight. And they basically kicked the shit out of each other for 3 rounds. And Alves got a unanimous decision. And before that, Jouban had been on a decent enough streak. He knocked out Seth Brzezinski. Seth Brzezinski's a pretty tough dude. Not the greatest fighter, but a tough dude. Hard to knock out. And I think we'll be finding Mr. Richard Walsh from Australia is 1 or 2 steps too high than his real level when he faces Jouban. I mean, Jouban's not elite, but he's very skilled. He punches and kicks hard. He's tough. And I see him winning, probably a unanimous decision in this fight. Richard Walsh, it's hard to know what this guy is capable of after only two fights in the UFC, which I think were early prelim fights. And a lot of these guys from Australia, they come and they're a bit limited after not fighting at a very high level. So I don't think Walsh can hang with Juban, and if he can, he's not going to win a round. Juban's going to win it 3-0, and that's going to be my bet. I'm pretty sure Juban's going to be a big favourite, so, you know, this one's an accumulator bet as opposed to a single, but I bet all the same. Okay, then, Jake, the Juggernaut, Ellenberger. Well, Juggernaut, more like an RV in his last couple of fights because he's been trucking along family style. His last fight against Gastelum was weird. Like, it was like he just knelt down and said, "Come on, Kevin, come over. Here, slap on the choke, go for it." And Gastelum just suddenly was way too easy, and it was kind of embarrassing for Ellenberger. Especially since he was, you know, it was critical that he put his career back on track. He had a fight against Rory McDonald where he barely threw a punch, and it was just an awful fight. Then he fought Robbie Lawler. Robbie did him by a TKO. I mean, he's got some decent wins in his record, Ellenberger. He's beaten Nate the Great, beaten Diego Sanchez, beaten Jake Shields, Sean Pearson, John Doomsday Howard's beaten Mike Pyle. You know, this dude, he came and he was on a streak and he was knocking people out and he was vicious, and then he decided he didn't want to punch anyone anymore. And that often happens when someone sticks a really powerful jab in your face. And one man who would be able to tell you that exact same story is Josh Koscheck. Possibly the man who suffered most from a jab in the UFC when he fought GSP for the second time. And GSP broke his eye socket, right? It fractured his orbital or something like that in the first round with a jab. And he fucked Koscheck up with that. And ever since, watching Koscheck fight, you see him sniffing and winking, and it looks like he got some permanent damage because GSP, and after breaking that eye socket, he hit him about another 50 times in it. So, Koscheck's taking some time off, probably to heal. He hasn't fought since November 2013, so we're looking at, 16 months without fighting for Koscheck, and he's also coming off 3 losses. Just like Jake, the RV Ellenberger. He lost to Tyrone Woodley, got knocked the fuck out. Robbie Lawler knocked him the fuck out in the first round as well. And he did a split decision with Johnny Hendricks, a fight he thought he won. Before that, it was Mike Pierce. He split decision. He KO'd Matt Hughes. Like, Koscheck's a good fighter. His problem was he decided he wanted to become a boxer fucking 10 years into his UFC career. Many's a fighter has made that mistake. Ooh, I can punch now. Now I'm going to be as good as a guy who's been punching for the last 15, 20 years. Well, I think he's pretty much learned his lesson. If he hasn't, and he just stands toe-to-toe with Jake Ellenberger, he's not as good as boxer as Jake Ellenberger. He doesn't have that strong jab. He's got solid power. But Koscheck, you need to go back to your base. You need to take this guy down. You need to pound him into oblivion. And that's how you're going to win. Jake, it's hard to say how Jake's going to approach this fight because Jake knows that Koscheck's going to try and take him down. Yet Jake can't be hesitant like he's been in the past. If he's hesitant, you know, there's no point fighting Jake if you're not going to throw a punch. You're just going to walk around for 3 months, three rounds defending yourself. So the intrigue in this fight is how aggressive Ellenberger is going to be given the threat of the Koscheck takedown, which is pretty damn good when he decides he's going to use it. And I think that Koscheck's skill level is a step or two higher than Ellenberger overall. I think Ellenberger went on a good run, but when he met some serious dudes, he's always come up short. I mean, he knocked out Matt Hughes. Okay, but that was Matt Hughes. It was the tail end of his career. Barely beat Mike Pierce. So I think that Koscheck is going to get a decision on Jake Ellenberger, and I think we might see Jake Ellenberger being cut after this. If it's a decidedly unimpressive performance, Koscheck wins it by decision to a round of boos from the crowd, which he loves, then we might see Jake being cut. But I think Koscheck's going to win this by a decision unless he can ground and pound a knockout of Jake Ellenberger, but I don't think he's going to be able to do that. I think it's going to be a decision, but Koscheck's got this in my eyes, so I reckon that's the bet for you. Okay, the co-main event. Well, Holly Holm is fighting Raquel Pennington. Now, Raquel Pennington, another girl that must be thinking she is pretty lucky. The co-main event of a UFC card. How did she get that? I mean, she lost. She won her last fight. She got a choke in last second in round one. It's pretty decent, but she lost a split decision to Jessica Andrade before that. She fought Roxanne Modafferi before that to unanimous decision, and I'm like, I don't know how any female fighter couldn't put away Roxanne Modafferi. She's possibly the worst fighter I've ever seen step into the octagon. She just has no skills, no speed, nothing on her feet, nothing at all. Apparently she's got a good jiu-jitsu game, but whenever I saw her on the ground, she was rubbish. So, I don't know. And before she beat Modafferi, she had 2 losses on her record. Zingano choked her out. Leslie Smith beat her. And Pennington suddenly finds herself with a 5-win and 4-loss record on a co-main event of a numbered UFC card. Strange indeed. And she's fighting Holly Holm, who is much more of a killer than Raquel Pennington. Holm, last fight she won by knockout in the 5th round. She hasn't been fighting in the UFC, but everyone knows Holly Holm's a decent fighter. This is her first fight in the UFC, and I'm not sure why it took her so long to get here, because she's a damn good fighter, and she's been knocking women out with head kicks and punches and kicks to the body and leg kicks. She is pretty serious, and Pennington just does not have the skills to be anywhere near Holm. It's just a matter of if Pennington can last the 3 rounds with Holm, and Pennington is tough, I'll give her that. She's never been knocked out, but I think she might get knocked out this time. And I will be betting a single for her to get knocked out. The odds probably won't be too good, but one way or another, Holly Holm is going in the win column in my accumulator this week. And I'll remind you guys, I scored an 80% on my accumulators last week. If not for that Rousey, Ruslan Khabilov throwing his fight, I'm pretty damn sure he threw the fight. In the first couple of minutes, he didn't even throw a single strike. He walked around afraid. A guy with the skills of Ruslan Khabilov, I don't know what he was at. And the other guy didn't deserve to win the fight either. He just stood there walking around. It was like Dan Severn, Ken Shamrock from back in the day. Now, if you ask me, somebody was paid off in that to do that, because that was just a joke. And maybe I'm just extremely bitter because I lost about $6,000 because I had all those other underdogs, if you remember, winning. All of my accumulators. I also had Sam Alvey by KO on my accumulator. And then Rustam, the motherfucker, cost me everything. So that's the last time I'll be betting on one of those dudes. Anyway, ranting over, we go to the main event of the evening. Alpha Cat Zingano, 9-0 versus Ronda Rousey, 10-0. Ronda is looking mean, as she always does. And to be honest with you, you'd be a fool to bet against Ronda. Some people bet on Zingano in this fight, but let's be serious here. Nobody, no female fighter is anywhere near the level of Ronda Rousey. Somehow, Miesha Tate managed to last 3 rounds, Ronda, but she got armbarred too. Miesha Tate is a great fighter, but she did last in 3 rounds. But that's the only one. Everyone else is gone in the first round. In the last fight, she beat Alexis Davis in 16 seconds. Sarah McMahon, knee to the body, 1 minute and 6 seconds. Armbar Carmouche, armbar Kaufman, armbar Tate, and various armbars before that. Now, if you look at Zingano, it's true. She's been impressive. She's a big girl. She's strong. She's talented. She came back after her husband committed suicide last time, and she beat Amanda Nunes. She knocked her out in the 3rd round. But that wasn't after she took a ferocious beating in round 1 from the Brazilian. And I don't think that... Zingano is doesn't start fights well. She wins a lot of fights late in the 3rd round, chokes, KOs, stuff like that, when she gets going. And I don't think she's going to have that luxury against Ronda Rousey. Ronda's going to hurt her in the 1st round, and she's probably going to knock her out with punches, or she's going to sink in a submission. And the problem is for these chicks fighting Ronda, they train defending arm bars, and then Ronda will just fucking knee in the body and lights out, elbow to the face. That's it. And I think Ronda's going to do the same. I think this fight will really set Ronda as, you know, the queen of women's MMA. I mean, she is the queen of women's MMA as it is, but people think Zingano's a threat. Zingano's not a threat. Ronda is going to dispense with her with ease in the first round, and that'll be that. So it mightn't be the greatest card we've ever seen, but there's some good bets on it, some good fights, and I wish you all luck, and I will be back soon enough.